Now you talk about terror. What about for me? I've been terrorized all my day. Hammer all my day.
As a member of the U.S. Congress for 16 years, Dennis Kucinich gave over 500 speeches warning about the consequences of U.S. wars against Afghanistan, the Balkans, Iraq, Iran, Libya, and Syria. He also spoke out for the imperative of peace in the Middle East on behalf of Israelis and Palestinians. He met with leaders of many countries who were grappling to keep their nations out of conflicts and came to understand the role some in the U.S. government have played to intentionally catalyze war, fueling arms sales globally without regard for the consequences. Dennis warns that we, in his words, are cartwheeling towards a massive East versus West war with religious and ethnic overtones. This seemingly inexorable march of nuclear folly may, he writes, pit the United States militarily against China, Russia, and their allies. Joining me to discuss how, as he writes, the polarization of U.S. politics, the cognitively impaired and failing executive branch, the instability of the congressional leadership, the purblind partisanship, the ideologically clickbait-driven media has produced a mad bloodlust for war against Iran and perhaps China and Russia, is Dennis Kucinich. You have fought the war industry with probably more consistency and courage than any U.S. politician. You've paid the price for it. But let's just lay out globally the reach of the war industry and how it functions and why it seems to be beyond the control of either political party.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be on your show. We are in a moment of peril, and the subtext of it, or maybe the context of it, begins with the fact that the United States has over 800 bases around the globe. This has been part and parcel of an attempt by America to use its military power to be able to control not just the politics of a country, but an economics of a country, and to stop the rise of any counterforce in the world. Of course, we know that that was vainglorious. The efforts have failed, and notwithstanding the fact that we have this archipelago of bases around the world, we have slipped from a position of unipolar leadership to moving to a multipolar world, which the United States has less and less influence upon, with the exception of certain economic moves that can be made to try to hamstring the economies of various countries through sanctions. Now, where this all begins is at the appropriations process. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower so famously warned us about in January of 1961 has every district of the United States, every congressional district has programs and projects in it that require funding and are put into an appropriations bill. Lobbyists confront members of Congress from their own communities saying, we need this for the jobs in our community. And together you have a defense production establishment, which is which is nationwide, and it has enormous influence with individual members. Now, beyond that, you have when members of Congress come in and they take an oath to defend the Constitution. Unfortunately, for many members of Congress, that means to just sign on to any military action which the administration recommends. And so there's very little deep thinking that goes on, especially where the money's going to come from, because the 31 trillion plus national debt, which the United States has, a substantial part of that, it comes from the country putting wars on a credit card. So ingrained into our system is the funding of wars and the and a perpetuation of conflict. Because if you're making all these arms material, you've got to use them. And the more that you use, the more you make. And there's a continuous loop here of money that just pours in. Right now, we're close to $1 trillion in this particular fiscal year, 2023, for the Pentagon plus the various intelligence services. And so that then is a substantial part of discretionary spending of the United States, depending on who you're talking to and what math. It's anywhere from 40 to 45%. So we're spending our national treasure on war. We're a war machine as a nation. We prefer war over healthcare. We prefer war over housing. We prefer war over education. We prefer war over the economic welfare of our own citizens. And this is something that more and more people are catching on to. And unfortunately, the last ones to catch on appear to be members of the United States Congress.
So how are decisions about war made? We see the public shills for war, the same people, whether it's Iraq or Libya or Syria or Afghanistan, these neocons who are well known, who brought us the war, 20 years of warfare in the Middle East. But they are spokespeople for obviously the war industry. If we look back at the last 2 decades, it's just fiasco after fiasco. I mean, nobody can describe any of these wars as a success. Who's making these decisions, and why is it bipartisan?
The decisions to go to war ostensibly would be made at the administration level. However, there is a broad network of public policy groups masquerading as independent voices, think tanks, academic organizations, people in the media who feed into any kind of narrative that would prompt the country to start to rattle the sabers or determine, well, we need to go here in order to defend our national interest. So once that appropriation process starts, let's keep in mind, you have close to $1 trillion in all accounts. They're on their own. I mean, that money's fungible. That money's there, which enables the United States at this very moment to send 2 aircraft carrier units out into the area near Israel. Now, you have to wonder, what's that all about? And what it's all about is that the United States right now has the money to be able to send troops anywhere they want in the world, or to pay for the ones that are already stationed. And they put the country at the threshold of a war the minute they do that. And when I say of a war, I mean of actual combat interactions. And the people who are pushing for this, we have to keep in mind that one of the things that drags us into war is an ideological mindset. Today in the United States, it's sponsored by a group famously known as neoconservatives, who see America as a force fighting against evil all over the world. And the Manichaean struggle, which they invite, is one that is generally of their own making, the desire to be able to create wars and to cash in. I mean, there are earnings reports coming out lately where some of the war contractors, or those who hold them in a portfolio, are citing what a great thing it is for the profits that are going to come as a result of what's happening in the Middle East right now. It's unconscionable. But we're in this cycle where we have a war-dependent economy. And the more that we spend on war materiel, the more likely we are to go to war. The more people we have at forward base around the world, the more likely we are to go to war. When an international crisis develops, such as has developed after most famously signed October 7th, 2023, we then see things go into motion that will support and justify the reason why we are there to begin with. And then from there, you go on to additional appropriations. And one of the things that I want to point out, the over $14 billion, which Congress will vote on perhaps in the at the beginning of November. Once Congress votes on that, forget declarations of war, Article 1, Section 8, the role of Congress in balancing off the executive's desire to go to war. Forget all that. Once the money is there. We're stuck. And it's kind of like gamblers, in for a dime, in for a dollar. Once we put that money down, we are at war, whether it's declared or not. And this is the danger of the moment that we're in right now, because the American people, unless they can convince their members of Congress, for whatever reason, whether it's, as one member of Congress, Tom Massey from Kentucky, said, we can't afford it. That's one way. Another way is to say, don't fuel the fire. Another way is to say, stop killing the Gazans. I mean, there are so many different reasons to avoid it, but the American people have to be heard from immediately. Call their members of Congress to say, don't fund the war. If they're so intent on spending money, spend it for diplomacy, spend it for humanitarian purposes, spend it for food, shelter, clothing, electricity, water, anything to try to relieve people from the veil of tears they're in right now and the fears for their life. But right now, our country, we are ready for war, and it's not just about funding an effort against the people of Gaza, but it's about getting ready for war against Iran, which would be catastrophic for the United States and for Israel. So I think that we're really at a crossroads right here, Chris. And the piece that I wrote in Substack kind of outlines the contours of it, because this war has both, it's not just geographical, it is ethnic and it is religious.
You have a situation where once the money comes in, it's not a congressional decision, it's a unilateral decision by the White House for instance, to send these carriers. No, Biden didn't consult anybody, except maybe Jake Sullivan, who probably made the decision for Biden. But all that power, that potential to essentially trigger a war is in the hands of the presidency. Congress isn't even part of the decision.
Once the money is there, and this is what I'd like your viewers to understand, you have the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, which the founders clearly put the power to make war in the hands of the House, because they didn't want an executive just roaming the world looking for enemies to slay, as Adams famously warned about. But if the Congress approves an appropriation that the president then wants to take to create a war, courts have held pretty consistently that Congress's ultimate power is the power of the purse. And if Congress wants to stop a war, don't fund it. If Congress wants to start a war, fund it. But Congress cannot go back after it funds a war and say, oh, we didn't mean that. We didn't mean for him to escalate. Hey, once they have the money, the administration, the president as commander-in-chief under the Constitution is able to use that war material in any way that he, or in the future she, would please.
And yet we see no pushback. I mean, the last budget, I think the Congress gave the Pentagon $40 billion more than they even requested. And in many ways, the Democratic Party is worse.
Yeah, it's become reflexive. The inability to ask questions about why. I mean, only after the fact will you see Inspector General's reports come back and say, well, you misspent billions here, billions there. After a while, it adds up. You go back to Major General Smedley Butler, who won 2 Medals of Honor for his service to the country at the beginning of the 20th century. And he concluded, famously, war's a racket. And this is a racket. And the members of Congress just go along. Look, let's face it. Once Citizens United became the law of the land, and money equaled free speech from the corporate standpoint, all this entire defense establishment was emboldened to just pour money into congressional races. And they do. And they do it, openly through $5,000 contributions or whatever they're allowed right now. And in addition to that, super PACs, which can make a difference in a congressional or Senate race. So, we have a almost a closed loop system that guarantees that we will continue to go to war, and there is no counterbalance for diplomacy or peace. That doesn't exist. The Department of State is there to rattle the saber, as the current Secretary of State Blinken has proven. The National Security Advisor Sullivan, he's there to keep fulminating. And of course, we know about the gentlelady who is a deputy secretary who has famously kept her neoconservative credentials alive since the beginning of her service to the United States as somebody who promotes war. So we have an entire uh, uh, phalanx of people at the administrative level who are promoting it every day. And they're supported by the think tanks, academics, the media. People don't question. And so we get pulled into this maw of war, and then people wonder why. Well, watch when American troops, when their lives are put on line, they're already being out there as bait, as far as I'm concerned. Our troops are in that region as bait, and if and when the troops start to die, and you get reports, maybe some have already, but if and when that starts to happen in large numbers, the American people are going to be horrified. But the money's good. The money could go out this week unless people call and object strongly. That's the way you stop a war. Stop funding it.
What they're playing with, as you've written, is a very dangerous global conflagration. It's like, tossing lit matches in towards pools of gasoline, not only in the Ukraine and not only in the Middle East, but also with China. The consequences are potentially catastrophic. In the case of China and Russia, we're dealing, of course, with nuclear powers. And then, of course, Israel has nuclear weapons. There's nothing to stop Israel from using a tactical nuclear weapon on Iran. Talk a little bit about how this could all go bad.
When we have these discussions about the danger which we can sense lies ahead, we have to look at things not out of fear, but out of a cold strategic analysis. The United States and Israel are seen as simultaneous in the actions in Gaza right now. That has created a furor, particularly in the Arab and in the Muslim world. The head of Turkey, Erdogan, just yesterday gave a speech to about 1 million people where he warned about, he invoked the image of the crescent versus the cross. We're talking crusades here, folks. The idea that if the United States and Israel are aimed at trying to wipe out people who are Arabs and most of whom are Muslims, what does that say to the rest of the Muslim world, which 9 million people in Israel, maybe 1.5 million of them Palestinians, in the larger Arab world surrounding Israel, hundreds of millions of Muslims and Arabs who are watching people in Gaza being slaughtered. So the emotional turmoil that comes from that then is informed by a very deep religious sentiment that is being provoked by the first week of October, ultra-nationalists marching from Temple Mount into Al-Aqsa and rearranging the furniture, shall we say politely. It could be, depending on who you talk to, that what we experienced on October 7th, notwithstanding the apparently very thorough planning that went on, that we had an Al-Aqsa Intifada as a flashpoint, because the destruction or the desecration of anything at Al-Aqsa is going to be responded to. And there are those in the ultra-nationalists who are all ready to try to push the Palestinians out of Gaza, push them, kill them, and then the Palestinians in West Bank, and to fulfill a dream that for them has biblical um, authorization for the fulfillment of the land of Israel, and then to rebuild the third temple, which of course would annihilate Al-Aqsa. When we start to get into religious sentiments and beliefs that go back thousands of years, and we have people motivated by prophecy, can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it can lead to, it can lead right to the Bible, which talks about Armageddon, the apocalypse. I mean, that's why we have to take this seriously. We can't just pretend, well, that'll never happen. Actually, it's moving in that direction right now. The leader of Turkey pronouncing crescent versus cross, raising the issue. Are we coming to that? We can't. This is I often talk about Barbara Tuchman's book, The March of Folly, where she writes as a historian, it's nothing new under humanity for leaders to prepare a course of action and execute it that is totally antithetical to the interests of their country. And this is what Mr. Netanyahu is doing with support from the right wing in Israel in enacting this biblical phraseology that he is quoting lately. There's a game being played here that is so dangerous that could pull us all into not just a regional war, but a world war. And so those are some of the antecedents that we have to consider when we're looking at an analysis of what we could be facing.
And why isn't the Biden administration offering any restraint? I mean, canceling or vetoing the ceasefire resolution at the UN, giving more military aid. It's not just they're passive, but they're actively involved. Why?
Well, first of all, you have to look at President Biden himself. He has never really been anyone who has said, whoa, wait a minute, let's not do this. He's generally been congenial to voting for war as a senator and voting for certainly defense or Pentagon appropriations. So that's where it's at. And then who surrounds him? The neocons that are his closest advisors. And they're spoiling for a war against Iran. This has been going on since Bush was president. There's no question about it. I mean, I gave about 150 speeches just on Iran alone, where I saw the Bush administration was actually talking about a strike on a nuclear research lab at Bashir. And I pointed out in the speech in Congress, we go ahead and do that. We're going to be creating a radioactive fallout around a good part of the globe. And is that something we're thinking about? So this is there an intention to take us right to the precipice here of a war? Absolutely. You can't say they're just, stumbling into this. No, these people are not stupid. I mean, I might question the rationale, and I do, behind their decisions, but they're ideologically driven. And some have said, look, just as let's use this to go after Iran, just like the pronouncement was made after 9/11, let's use this to go after Iraq. And it's the declensions of war. Iraq, Iran, I run to hell.
Why Iran? I mean, you have oil in Iran, you have more oil in Iraq. What is it? Do they think that is it just this vision that they're going to remake the Middle East into their own image? What do you think is driving this animus towards Iran? And of course, we have to be clear, Bibi Netanyahu has been pushing for a strike on Iran for a long time. And it's my understanding that the Pentagon has essentially been very wary about carrying out strikes against Iran.
Well, I had a chance to talk to Mr. Netanyahu as a member of Congress on a committee that he testified to. And he at this committee, he said, well, the United States ought to go after this. Chris, this could have been 25 years ago. that the United States should go after Iraq, Iran, and Syria. And after the hearing, I met him in the hall and I said, Mr. Netanyahu, why don't you do it? And he said, oh, no, 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 no. You should do it. This is a, you know, leaders go to war for all kinds of reasons. Some reasons that they may be in political trouble and they think war is going to save them. That can be part of Netanyahu's calculus, could also be part of Joe Biden's calculus. Wartime president, don't change horse in the middle of the stream, on and on and on. Iran, I think, in its nuclear research, represented a threat to Israel that, people who were otherwise condign on the issue of Iran said, hey, wait a minute, we better look at this. We don't really see eye to eye. They could try to strike us. And, in the dialectic of conflict, it goes into the calculus of a nuclear exchange. If you think the other guy's going to hit you, you might hit him first. And so that's one thing. Iran has risen as a technological power. It's not an Arab country; it is Persian, and it has developed a society which is advanced. It's not well understood by the United States that the people of Iran, they're not afraid of America. They don't expect to be attacked, but if they're attacked, they will respond and they'll be ready. And they've developed some very accurate missiles that can travel thousands of miles. The thing that I'm concerned about is that in this dialectic of conflict that we're seeing move along in an escalatory fashion, look, this could mean the end of Israel. I don't know why that isn't. I mean, I'm sure people in Israel are living with this, are starting to get concerned. Hey, where is this headed? But we cannot create a war with Iran without expecting a retaliatory strike with everything that Iran has on Israel itself. So, it's like, back off, stop it, stop this this forward momentum towards a cataclysm.
To what extent do you think these neocons who have orchestrated these debacles in the Middle East essentially are using Iran as a scapegoat? I mean, they made the mess, but are they kind of trying to offload it onto Iran? And once we get rid of Iran, our kind of utopian vision of the Middle East will appear?
Oh, I think that's part of it, no question about it. I've got a library here. A lot of the books recently in the last 20 years are about Iraq. And it's very interesting how you can see the parallels between what we're doing in with respect to Iran right now. Now, the CIA reports that I saw did not say that Iran was directly linked to what happened on October 7th. But there are those who want to create that connection now in order to blame Iran for that, just as we falsely blamed Iraq for 9/11. And Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And according to our own intelligence agencies, Iran was not connected to October 7th. So there is this, it really goes back to the Project for a New American Century. We're talking about just as there are plans in Iraq that are driven by history and ideology and politics, so too in the United States. There are plans that are driven by similar metrics, and it puts us in a position where we're moving towards a war against Iran, and we're not really thinking about where is this going to take us. All of this, the ships, the carriers, the planes that we've already sent over ostensibly to protect Israel. No, they're really in a forward ready position to be able to deploy for an attack on Iran. And we're not fooling anyone, least of all Iran on this. Iran's been preparing for this for some time. And then one has to ask, as war planners sometimes do, where does this lead? China's already standing with Iran. We are already opposed to Russia and the games that were played with respect to Ukraine. So where do we go? We are looking at a conflict that inevitably will take us against two other nuclear powers, China and Russia. Isn't anybody aware of how dangerous this situation is with respect to standing guard for Israel while they go ahead and the government just levels Gaza and kills hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps? Somebody has to say, look, we're playing in the flash of World War III here, and we ought to stop. And is beyond a ceasefire. There has to be a stand down and just stop it, so that Israel can be secured from destruction, so that the Gazans can be protected from destruction, so that those in the West Bank can be protected from destruction, so that our nation and the nations of the world can be protected from destruction. One need only go back to the poetry of William Yeats, when he famously wrote The Second Coming, turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. All things fall apart. The center cannot hold. And what we're seeing here is the center of gravity that holds the world together right now is starting to fracture. And once that happens, the potential for a very wide war is introduced. And once it starts, it plays itself out, as wars always do, over, depending on what kind of weapons are used.
Well, and those carrier groups are not deployed in the Mediterranean. They're deployed in the Persian Gulf, off the coast of Iran.
Right. Thank you. You're right about that.
So it's a very clear threat to Iran.
Well, that's why they're there in the Persian Gulf. Iran, Persian. Hello.
Yeah. Great. We can find you at DennisKucinich.substack.com. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my Substack address.
Right. Okay. I'm a subscriber. Everyone else should subscribe. That was.
Thank you. Anybody wants to subscribe, your subscriptions are gratefully received.
That was Dennis Kucinich. I want to thank the Real News Network and its production team, Cameron Granadino, Adam Coley, David Hebden, and Kayla Rivera. You can find me at chrishedges.substack.com.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.